The continent of Westeros is a land cast in the mould of classic medieval fantasy, filled with knights sworn to act with honour, justice and chivalry. Yet the main Game of Thrones series exists primarily to deconstruct these romantic values, presenting us with characters such as Sir Meryn Trent, Sir Gregor Clegane, and other cowards and brutes who fail to live up to their knightly vows. However, the Dunk and Egg series treats its readers to a different, more optimistic take on the themes of medieval chivalry. Comprising 3 short novellas, written between 1998 and 2010, Dunk and Egg is a thematic departure from the main series. Starring the titular Sir Duncan Dunk the Tall and his bald squire boy Egg, these prequel/spin-off stories feature a simpler, more light-hearted style of storytelling, one in which the values of honour, chivalry and friendship are played straight. In this special long-form video, we will depart from the grand fantasy epic narrative that dominates the rest of the Song of Ice and Fire franchise, moving away from the fate of the Seven Kingdoms and following the humble, chaotic tale of a simple and good-hearted hedge knight as he travels the land with his faithful squire, upholding his oath to protect the weak and innocent wherever he goes. Welcome to our summary of the story of Dunk and Egg, where we will provide an abridged summary of the plot of the 3 novellas, The Hedge Knight, The Sworn Sword, and The Mystery Knight. While this down-to-earth story might be good for some, for others you'll want to see the adventures of gods and monsters deciding the fate of all reality, and so we'll also introduce you to our sponsor today, Motto Immortal. This is a new strategic card collector RPG, in which you will be putting together a team of the world's most powerful gods and spirits to cleanse a world that has fallen into darkness. The game mixes collecting, idle progression and roguelike battling with the added twist that since you'll be collecting these beautiful deities into your service, you can ask them to divine your fortunes. Yes, you can have your character perform real tarot readings for you to answer any question you wish, using an AI-driven conversation system. Or you can learn your fortunes for the day from your trusted divine companions. But where it really shines is combining the strengths of your celestial warriors to tackle quests, bosses and dungeons, including your ascent through the mighty celestial tower. Some choice picks we'll recommend are Ares, a powerful card you can get for free once you complete your sign-up, Isis, an archer ideal for the early game PvE modes, and Freya, source of all beauty and a powerful support character available early on. Well, there's a lot to explore in this dark and beautiful world, and it's free, so download and take a look today. Plus, if you use our link in the description or QR code, you'll also get a starter pack with extra resources worth $50. So dive into Motto Immortal, where myths shuffle and fates mingle. The tales of Sir Duncan the Tall and his faithful squire Egg take place in the year 209 AC, 89 years before the events of A Game of Thrones, and just over 200 years since Aegon the Conqueror and his 2 sister wives rode across the narrow sea upon their mighty dragons and subjugated the continent of Westeros under Targaryen rule. By 209 AC, the dragons had been extinct for nearly a century. Nevertheless, the descendants of Old Valyria continued to rule over the western continent their ancestors had conquered on Dragonback, albeit not without challenges to their rule. King Aegon IV Targaryen was known as Aegon the Unworthy, and for good reason. A corpulent hedonist, he had spent his reign tending not to affairs of state, but to his many mistresses, with whom he sired over a dozen illegitimate children. In a bafflingly ill-advised edict, Aegon the Unworthy legitimized all of his bastard sons on his deathbed, affirming their claims to the throne. If this alone did not guarantee dynastic strife, the dying king further stoked the flames of conflict by bequeathing Blackfire to one of his bastards, a handsome and fierce knight named Daemon. Blackfire had been the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, and its value as a symbol of power and legitimacy could not be understated. Daemon Targaryen was the king's eldest trueborn son, yet he was a gentle, bookish man with a mien more befitting a clerk than a monarch. Daemon Blackfire, who took the name of the sword he now bore, was a bastard with a weaker claim to the throne, yet possessed a magnetic charisma and bore the spitting image of the mighty Aegon the Conqueror and wielded his iconic blade. One had legal legitimacy, yet the other had symbolic legitimacy. It was inevitable that the Lords of the Realm would divide along which silver-haired son of the king should sit upon the Iron Throne. When King Aegon IV finally departed for the Seven Hells in 184 AC, he left behind a realm on the precipice of war. In 196 AC, Daemon Blackfire launched a rebellion against his half-brother, King Daemon II. A vicious war raged for a year, setting the countryside alight in fire and blood. In the end, King Daeron's Targaryen loyalists defeated the Blackfyre pretenders at the decisive Battle of Redgrass Field, in which Daemon Blackfyre was slain. Yet the would-be usurper's issue lived on, as his half-brother, Bittersteel, and his sons fled across the Narrow Sea. Nevertheless, the realm was now at peace, at least for the moment. It is here that we descend from our bird's-eye view of Westeros and descend upon a rainy field in the Reach, where a big, lunk-headed youth is digging a grave. Born amidst congested human refuse in the flea-bottom slums of King's Landing, the boy known as Dunk was rescued from the streets by an elderly hedge knight known as Sir Arlen of Pennytree, who took him in at just 6 years old and trained him to be his squire. Hedge knights were the freelancers of Westeros, in the most literal sense of the word. Instead of residing in a castle as part of a lord's retinue, hedge knights served no master, travelling the length and breadth of the Seven Kingdoms as itinerant wanderers, competing in tourneys to earn prize money, and selling their titular lances to whoever would pay for their services. Unlike their landed counterparts, hedge knights were usually poor, their only items of worth being their arms, armour and horses. In order to make ends meet, many hedge knights became bandits and robbers. Others, however, stayed true to the ideals of justice and chivalry. Sir Allen of Pennytree was one such righteous knight, and instilled his chivalric ideals into his young squire. A decade later, Sir Arlen had passed away on the road from a chill, leaving his young squire to fend for himself. At just 16 years old, Dunk had grown into a towering mass of fat, sinew and muscle just short of 7 feet tall. Dunk the Lunk, Sir Arlen had often called him, thick as a castle wall. Yet what Dunk lacked in quick thinking or sharp wit, he made up for with his kind heart, strong sense of justice and sheer bullish strength. Dunk dug a grave for Sir Arlen and laid the old knight within the earth. Although the young squire was never taught any proper prayers, he said a few words to commend his master to the afterlife. He then took up Sir Arlen's sword, shield, armour and 3 horses. Henceforth, he continued his journey to the place where he and his master had been heading before the latter died, to the castle town of Ashford, where a tourney was being held. En route, Dunk passed through a small village and decided to seek a warm meal at the local inn. There, he encountered a pasty-faced, skinny child, no more than 9 years old. A stable boy, he assumed, one which he would soon find had an attitude problem. "I want my palfrey rubbed down and oats for all 3. Can you tend to them?" The boy looked at him brazenly. "I could, if I wanted." Dunk frowned. "I'll have none of that. I'm a knight, I'll have you know." "You don't look to be a knight." "Do all knights look the same?" "No, but they don't look like you either. Your sword belt's made of rope." "So long as it holds my scabbard, it serves. Now see to my horses." Leaving his steeds in the bald boy's care, Dunk headed into the tavern for some food and ale. Inside, he was recognised by a foppish lordling, slumped over his table and deep in his cups. "I dreamed of you," the inebriated noble lamented, pointing at Dunk with a trembling finger. "You stay away from me. Do you hear? You stay well away." Dismissing those ominous words as senseless rambling, Dunk finished his meal and headed back outside to find the bald stable boy wearing Sir Arlen's armour and riding around on his warhorse. Dunk gave the little scamp a scolding, yet undaunted, the boy begged to be taken along on Dunk's journey. Unwilling to subject the child to the hardships of the life of a travelling hedge knight squire, Dunk refused and continued his journey alone. The meadow across the river from Ashford's castle town was awash in blooms of linen colour, a city of tents, merchants' stalls and performers' stages. Rising above the cotton sprawl were opulent silken pavilions, bearing the heraldry of the Lion of Lannister, the Stag of Baratheon, the ivory battlements of Hightower, and the colours of numerous other houses, both big and small. Dunk had no place among those high lords, so he set up camp in a woodland a ways away, and went off to acquire armour that better fit his massive proportions than the old chainmail he'd inherited from Sir Arlen. Within the tawny markets, Dunk encountered a rough-hewn blacksmith named Steely Pate, who agreed to forge the big lad a new set of armour, in exchange for an advanced deposit of Sir Arlen's old gear and one of his horses, the rest to be paid with the tawny champion's prize money, which Dunk insisted would be his. Upon returning to his camp, Dunk was flabbergasted to find none other than the boy from the stables. Surprised by the boy's persistence, Dunk finally agreed to take him on as a squire and gave the boy his name. The wretched boy laughed aloud. "Dunk?" he said. "Sir Dunk? That's no name for a knight. Is it short for Duncan?" Duncan, yes, he said. Sir Duncan of... Dunk had no other name, nor any house. Sir Duncan the Tall. I've never heard of any Sir Duncan the Tall. Do you know every knight in the Seven Kingdoms, then? The boy looked at him boldly. The good ones. I'm as good as any. After the tourney, they'll all know that. Do you have a name, thief? The boy hesitated. Egg, he said. Now furnished with a squire to tend to his camp and his horses, Sir Duncan the Tall reported to Lord Ashford's steward to register for the tourney, only to be told that he required a noble to vouch for his knightly status to be eligible to participate. Wandering into the great hall of Ashford Castle, the Hedge Knight stumbled upon none other than the Crown Prince Baelor Breakspear Targaryen, heir apparent to the Iron Throne, and his younger brother, Prince Maekar Targaryen. The foul-tempered Maekar dismissed Dunk immediately, but Baelor remembered Sir Allen, who broke 4 lances against him in a tourney years ago at Storm's End. Baelor vouched for Dunk, and advised him to change the sigil on his shield, as only a true-born son may inherit a knight's arms. Heeding the Crown Prince's advice, Dunk visited a troupe of Dornish puppeteers, which he had taken notice of earlier, asking a tall, slender young woman among them to repaint Sir Arlen's shield. The woman's beauty was not lost on Dunk, who quickly became smitten. I'm called Sir Duncan the Tall. I'm Tansel, she laughed. Tansel Too Tall, the boys used to call me. You're not too tall, Dunk blurted out. You're just right for... He realized what he had been about to say and blushed. Flustered, Dunk improvised a new sigil for himself, which he decided should be a shooting star streaking over an elm tree. He then retrieved his squire and went with him to spectate the first round of jousting. Together they witnessed a match between one Sir Humphrey Harding and Aerion Brightflame Targaryen, the son of the Prince Maekar Targaryen that Dunk had had a run-in with earlier. Aerion proved himself a dishonourable combatant, aiming his lance not at his opponent but at his horse, impaling the steed and causing it to crash and break Sir Humphrey's leg. Later, Dunk re-encountered the Fossaways of Cider Hall, whom he had acquainted himself with the previous day. Bearing the banner of a red apple over a golden field, the Fossaways were a minor house, represented at the Ashford tourney by the hot-headed blowhard Sir Stephen Fossaway, and his younger and more gentle-tempered squire and cousin Sir Raymond Fossaway. The pair took a quick liking to Dunk and invited him to their pavilion for a cup of arbor wine. Their night of revelry, however, was suddenly interrupted. Sir Duncan! Egg burst in, panting. His hood had fallen back, and the light from the brazier shone in his big, dark eyes. You have to run! He's hurting her! Dunk lurched to his feet, confused. Hurting? Who? Aerion! The boy shouted. He's hurting her! The puppet girl! Hurry! Whirling, he darted back out into the night. Dunk rushed to follow, arriving at the Dornish puppeteer's stand to see the detestable Aerion Targaryen smashing up the puppets in a fit of violent contempt. According to the sadistic young prince, the performer's crime had been to depict a dragon dying in battle. A dragon, Prince Aerion sneered, ought never lose. When Aerion broke one of Tansel's fingers, Dunk smashed the Targaryen to the ground. Although the Hedge Knight had acted chivalrously in defense of a damsel in distress, he had just struck a royal prince. Aerion's men seized Dunk by the arms, ready to subject him to torture for his capital offense. Just then, the young squire boy, Egg, burst onto the scene. No, a boy's voice said. Don't hurt him. Gods be good, the boy, the brave, foolish boy, Dunk thought. He fought against the arms restraining him, but it was no good. Hold your tongue, you stupid boy. Run away, they'll hurt you. No, they won't. Egg moved closer. If they do, they'll answer to my father, and my uncle as well. Prince Aerion paid them no mind. Impudent little wretch, he said to Egg, spitting a mouthful of blood at the boy's feet. What happened to your hair? I cut it off, brother, said Egg. I didn't want to look like you. Thus, Dunk was spared from a grisly death and instead let off to be imprisoned in one of Ashford Castle's towers, reeling from the revelation that Egg was in fact short for Aegon Targaryen, son of Prince Maekar Targaryen and the grandson of the king. Later, Egg visited Dunk in his cell, apologizing for keeping the truth from him and explaining all. Egg, Aegon, had come to the lands of Lord Ashford for the tourney, alongside the rest of Prince Maekar's sons. He had been supposed to squire for one of his older brothers, Prince Daeron the Drunken, who turned out to have been the inebriated lord whom Dunk had encountered back in the village tavern. Only Daeron had no intention of competing in the tourney, and had instead run away with Egg to hide amongst the local peasantry. Daeron has common hair, a sort of pale brown, nothing special, but mine is like Aerion's and my father's. The blood of the dragon, Dunk said. Silver gold hair and purple eyes, everyone knows that. Yes, so Daeron shaved it off. He meant for us to hide until the tourney was over. Only then you took me for a stable boy, and he lowered his eyes. I didn't care if Daeron fought or not, but I wanted to be somebody, Squire. I'm sorry, sir. I truly am. Moved by the boy's earnestness, Dunk accepted the young prince's apology. Egg then brought Dunk before an audience with his uncle, the Crown Prince Baelor. Baelor expressed sympathy with Dunk's situation, admitting that his nephew Aerion was a nasty piece of work. Still, the charge of striking a royal prince could not simply be dismissed, and at its most lenient, the punishment for such was the amputation of a hand and foot. Alternatively, Prince Baelor suggested, Dunk could ask the gods to prove his innocence by invoking his right to a trial by combat. Unsurprisingly, Sir Duncan decided to vindicate himself through an honourable duel. Yet there was a catch. Rather than agreeing to fight Dunk one-on-one, the accuser, Aerion Targaryen, demanded a trial by 7, a team contest in which 7 knights on the side of the prosecution would face off against 7 knights on the side of the defendant. According to this ancient Andal custom, if either party could not convince 6 other men to stand with them, they automatically forfeited. 6 knights, Dunk thought. They might as well have told him to find 6,000. He had no brothers, no cousins, no old comrades who had stood beside him in battle. Why would 6 strangers risk their own lives to defend a hedge knight against 2 royal princelings? Sure enough, Prince Aerion had no trouble filling out his roster. 3 of the 7 white-cloaked Kingsguard would fight alongside him. Also taking up arms was Egg and Aerion's father, Prince Maker, who was secretly ashamed of his disgraceful sons, Daeron and Aerion, and saw Dunk as a scapegoat to blame their failings on. Daeron the Drunken, too, would fight alongside his elder brother and father. Embarrassed at having let young Aegon slip between his fingers, he had made up a story about how Dunk had kidnapped the boy. In spite of this, the mulish Prince Daemon visited Dunk in his camp, admitting that he only laid false accusations upon the Hedge Knight to save face, and promising to take a dive from his horse during the contest, rather than put up an actual fight. Daeron then revealed that his drunken accusations that night at the tavern had not been some inebriated nonsense. Like several Targaryens before him, dating back to before the doom of Old Valyria, Prince Daeron had been born with the gift of prophetic visions and had seen the Hedge Knight in his dreams, where Sir Duncan had fallen but stayed alive, with the corpse of a great dragon over him. Unable to spare much thought for visions and prophecy, Dunk set about acquiring the 6 allies he required. Miraculously, he actually began to fill out a roster. His first volunteer was the Apple Knight Sir Stephen Fossaway, eager to win glory as an underdog. Next came Sir Humphrey of House Beesbury and Sir Humphrey Harding, who sought revenge over Prince Aerion for his dirty antics during their joust. I had heard your leg was broken. You heard the truth, Harding said. I cannot walk, but so long as I can sit a horse, I can fight. In addition, young Egg had leveraged his royal surname to bring yet more allies to Dunk's cause, enlisting the grizzled greybeard Sir Robin Rissling and Sir Lionel of the Great House Baratheon, who, due to his habit of manic howling during combat, was known as the Laughing Storm. Meanwhile, Dunk was astonished to find himself transformed into an overnight hero to the common folk, including the blacksmith Steely Pate, who had decided to accept no payment for the suit of armour he had forged for the Hedge Knight. Why, he asked Pate, what am I to them? A knight who remembers his vows, the smith said. Yet in a body blow to the Hedge Knight's rising spirits, Sir Stephen Fossaway returned from a brief absence, announcing his intention to switch sides and fight for Aerion. Furious at his cousin's dishonourable betrayal, young Raymond Fossaway announced he would fight on the side of Sir Duncan against his own kinsman. Only a squire, Raymond was knighted by Sir Lionel, so he may do so. Still, this only brought Dunk's fellowship back up to 6. He lacked his 7th man, and time was running out. The jousting grounds had been prepared for the trial, and a crowd had gathered to watch the spectacle. Riding up and down the stands, Sir Duncan the Tall cried out in desperation to the myriad lords and knights in attendance, beseeching any one of them to fight by his side. He received only tepid silence in reply. Heartsick, Dunk wheeled thunder and raced back and forth before the tears of pale, cold men. Despair made him shout, "Are there no true knights among you?" Only silence answered. Across the field, Prince Aerion laughed. "The dragon is not mocked," he called out. Then came a voice. "I will take Sir Duncan's side." Emerging from the river mists rode a knight in shining black armor, bearing a shield with a red dragon and 3 roaring heads. The knight lifted his visor, revealing himself to be none other than Baelor Breakspear Targaryen, Crown Prince of the 7 Kingdoms. "Brother, have you taken leave of your senses?" Prince Maekar pointed a mailed finger at Dunk. "This man attacked my son." "This man protected the weak, as every true knight must," replied Prince Baelor. "Let the gods determine if he was right or wrong." So it was that both sides acquired 7 riders, and so it was that the trial by combat began. 14 knights thundered down the lists, lances levelled, churning up the earth under the galloping hooves of their barded steeds and smashing into one another, 2 walls of oak, iron and steel colliding at top speed. Prince Daemon was immediately punched off his horse by Sir Robin, and true to his word, he stayed down, yielding and withdrawing his accusation against Sir Duncan. Prince Baelor clashed with the 3 Kingsguards, exploiting their honour-bound oath to never harm a royal prince. Dunk, meanwhile, bore down on the wretched Aerion Targaryen. Hedge Knight and Prince collided, and Dunk was knocked off his horse and onto his back, his enemy also unhorsed but on his feet, wielding a Morning Star and ready to finish the job. Dunk rolled. Where he found the strength he did not know, but he found it. He rolled into Aerion's legs, threw a steel-clad arm around his thigh, dragged him cursing into the mud, and rolled on top of him. Aerion was strong, but Dunk was stronger, and larger and heavier as well. He grabbed hold of the shield with both hands and twisted until the straps broke. Then he brought it down on top of the princeling's helm, again and again and again, smashing the enamelled flames of his crest. "Yield!" he shouted. "I yield," the dragon whispered, pale lips barely moving. Exhausted, Dunk fell down from his injuries and saw Baelor standing over him, offering the Hedge Knight a place in his service. Yet the Crown Prince was behaving oddly, his words slurred. With help from Steely Pate, he removed his helm, to reveal that part of his skull had been smashed in. Baelor collapsed on top of Dunk, dead. Daeron the Drunken's prophecy had come true. Sir Duncan the Tall lay fallen in the mud, the corpse of a great dragon laying on top of him. The Hedge Knight had proved his innocence, but it had cost the life of Baelor of House Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, Hand of the King, Protector of the Realm, and heir apparent to the Iron Throne of the 7 Kingdoms of Westeros. After the dust settled, Sir Duncan was summoned before Prince Maekar, who conceded victory to the Hedge Knight and informed him that he was sending his son Aerion into exile in Lys. Maekar revealed that it was he who had dealt the fatal blow to Prince Baelor, and lamented that many in the 7 Kingdoms would now see him as a kinslayer, seeking to climb up the line of succession. All had beloved Prince Baelor, the great hope of the 7 Kingdoms, and Maekar wondered aloud why the gods had seen fit to take his life to save a lowly Hedge Knight. Dunk admitted he did not know, but perhaps the gods had a purpose for him yet. Moving on past his philosophical mourning, Prince Maekar revealed the purpose of his audience with the Hedge Knight. "My youngest son seems to have grown fond of you, sir. It is time he was a squire, but he tells me he will serve no knight but you. He is an unruly boy, as you will have noticed. Will you have him?" So it was that Sir Duncan the Tall and his faithful squire Egg set out onto the open road, towards their next great adventure. 2 years had passed since the events at Ashford Tourney, during which time the realm had been devastated by a deadly plague known as the Great Spring Sickness, which had reaped a bloody harvest of hundreds of thousands of lives throughout Westeros. Among the victims was King Daeron II and his grandson Prince Valar, the son of the late Prince Daeron Breakspear and heir to the Iron Throne. The crown subsequently passed to Aerys I Targaryen, uncle to the now 10-year-old Egg, who was presently travelling the open road alongside the Hedge Knight Sir Duncan the Tall. After departing Ashford, Dunk and Egg had journeyed south to seek freelance work in Dorne, which had survived the Great Spring Sickness relatively unscathed. Since then, the knight and his loyal squire had travelled back north to the Reach, where they had entered into the service of Sir Eustace Osgrey. Grey of hair and thick of moustache, the elderly Sir Eustace put the minor in minor lord, possessing a paltry strip of land containing only 3 poor villages, which he ruled from Steadfast, an unimpressive castle scarcely larger than a watchtower. Bearing the heraldry of a checkered lion, House Osgrey had once been among the most powerful houses in the Northern Reach, but their lands had been steadily shrinking since the Targaryen conquest. Since then, their ancestral castle of Coldmoat had come under the possession of another house, House Webber, whose sigil was a spotted red spider upon a silver web. Despite this, Sir Eustace had once enjoyed a friendly relationship with his contemporary, Lord Wyman Webber. He had even sent his beloved youngest son, Adam Osgrey, to squire for Lord Wyman in Coldmoat. Tragically, however, Adam and the rest of Sir Eustace's sons had all perished in the First Blackfire Rebellion. Osgrey-Webber relations had deteriorated once more after Lord Wyman passed away with no sons, leaving Coldmoat to his daughter, Lady Roanne Webber. A woman with a sinister reputation, Lady Roanne was known as the Red Widow. 4 times she had been wed, and 4 times her husbands had died, invoking rumours that she was a witch and a poisoner. It was a scorching hot afternoon when Sir Duncan and his squire made their way back to Steadfast from a wine delivery run. A terrible drought had descended upon the land, leaving crops withering in the fields. Upon returning to the Chequy Lion's Keep, Dunk and Egg were joined by the malodorous, foul-tempered Sir Bennis of the Brown Shield, another knight in Sir Eustace's service. Egg noticed that the river near Steadfast had completely dried up almost overnight, which was unusual, even during a drought. Thus, Bennis and Duncan went to investigate, following its banks towards its source. The pair eventually arrived at a dam constructed by the peasants of Lady Roanne Webber of Coldmoat. Sir Bennis demanded that they tear down the dam, only for the peasants to defiantly refuse. Easily provoked, Sir Bennis lashed out, slashing one of the elder workers across the face with his sword. Yet the peasants still refused to be cowed, leaving the 2 knights with no recourse but to return to Steadfast. Upon hearing of the incident, Sir Eustace was predictably furious, insisting that Lady Roanne had no right to dam the stream. "I caught fish there as a boy, and my sons all did the same. Alysanne likes to splash in the shallows on hot summer days like this." Alysanne had been his daughter, who had perished in the spring. "This cannot be borne, sirs. The woman will not have my water. She will not have my Chequy water." Sir Eustace was resolved to retake his stream, while also acknowledging that the Red Widow would surely raise men to come and demand Sir Bennis's head for slicing one of her peasants. Yet if armed conflict it was to be, then the Chequy Lion was severely outmatched by the Spider. Webber had the larger house, and possessed a force of trained levies and 15 professional knights. Sir Eustace, on the other hand, possessed no trained levies and only 2 knights. In order to make up the gulf in numbers, Sir Eustace instructed Dunk and Bennis to raise the local peasantry. It was a pathetic rabble that Duncan and Bennis managed to assemble, composed of just 8 slack-jawed villagers with no combat experience. It was immediately obvious that sending these men into battle against the Red Widow's forces meant sending them to their deaths. Concerned for the small folk, Egg suggested to Dunk that they, quote, use his boot. Indeed, within the young squire's footwear was tucked a royal signet ring given to him by his father, Prince Maekar, with the instruction to use it when he and Sir Duncan came into dire danger. The current Hand of the King was Brynden Rivers, a bastard son of the late King Aegon the Unworthy, better known by his epithet Bloodraven. Bloodraven had spies everywhere, and as soon as Egg presented his royal ring, he would hear word of it and send the king's troops to his location. Dunk, however, refused to let his squire reveal his identity, deeming it unnecessary. "What did your father tell you when he sent you off to squire for me?" "To keep my hair shaved or dyed, and tell no man my true name," the boy said, with obvious reluctance. Hoping to avoid bloodshed, Sir Duncan volunteered to personally entreat with the Lady Webber on Sir Eustace's behalf, setting off the next morning. The pair soon arrived at Coldmoat, where they passed by a young woman practicing with a longbow, before being greeted by Lady Roanne's castellan, a knight named Sir Lucas Inchfield, also known as the Long Inch. Sir Lucas showed immediate hostility to Dunk, threatening to have him executed over the altercation at the dam, as well as taunting the Hedge Knight by tricking him into believing a frumpy older lady was Roanne, when she was not. Yet soon enough, the real Lady Roanne revealed herself to be the young archer. Dunk looked from one lady to the other. "You were the Red Widow," he heard himself blurt out. "But you're too young?" The girl tossed her longbow to the lanky lad he'd seen her shooting with. "I am 25 as it happens, or was it small you meant to say?" Pretty. It was pretty. Dunk did not know where that came from, but he was glad it came. Seeing not a conniving old hag, but an attractive young woman, Dunk found himself quickly smitten with Lady Rowan, an attraction which was evidently mutual. The Red Widow looked Dunk over, from his heels up to his head, though her gaze lingered longest on his chest. A tree and shooting star. I have never seen those arms before. She touched his tunic, tracing a limb of his elm tree with 2 fingers. Rowan instructed Dunk to be led to her guest chambers to wait while she prepared to receive him more formally, during which time the Hedge Knight found himself in the company of the ladies' chaplain, the fat, flatulent and talkative Stepton Sefton. Sefton dispelled the rumours that his lady was a man-eating witch. All her husbands, the first of whom she'd been betrothed to at 10 years old, had died of causes beyond her control, ranging from battle to choking on a chicken bone. The Septon also revealed that Rowan's future was looking bleak. Per her father Lord Wyman's will, the Lady Spider would only be permitted to keep Castle Coldmoat so long as she remarried within 2 years of his death, a date which was fast approaching. Unfortunately for her, she had few desirable suitors. Many lords feared to wed the supposedly husband-slaying Red Widow, while others feared her violent and ill-tempered castellan, Sir Lucas Longinch, who was determined to marry Rowan himself by force if necessary. It was here that Rowan entered the room, and the official parley began. Unfortunately for Dunk, the lady was willful, resisting to budge on either the issue of the river or the matter of Sir Bennis, who she insisted be delivered to her so she may have his nose chopped off. Furthermore, she revealed a document bearing the king's seal, which revealed information that Sir Eustace had kept from Dunk, that the Chequy waters legally and undisputedly belonged to House Webber. Sir Eustace, it turned out, was a former traitor, a Blackfire supporter. He had been pardoned by the late King Daeron the Good after all his sons had died fighting for the usurper Daemon, but his waters had been granted to House Webber, who had sided with the Targaryen loyalists. Dunk could not read, but Egg, an educated royal, confirmed the document's authenticity. Sir Duncan was shocked, but was not ready to give up. He asked Lady Rowan relent for the sake of the memory of Adam Osgrey, Sir Eustace's son, who once lived in Coldmoat alongside her. Suddenly, Lady Rowan slapped Duncan hard across the mouth and ordered him to leave, delivering an ultimatum that Sir Bennis must be delivered the next day, or she would come for him with fire and sword. On his way out, Septon Sefton informed the Hedge Knight that Rowan had loved Adam secretly, more so than any of her husbands. That her beloved Adam had perished on the Redgrass fields, fighting in a rebellion his father dragged him into, was something that Lady Rowan could never forgive Sir Eustace for, and why invoking Adam's name for the old man's sake had prompted such a violently emotional reaction. Thus, Osgrey and Webber remained at an impasse. Upon returning to Steadfast, Egg blurtingly demanded of Sir Eustace why he had betrayed his rightful king. Because Daemon was the better man. The old king saw it too. He gave the sword to Daemon Blackfire, the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, the blade that every Targaryen king had wielded since the conquest. My father says that was because Daemon was a swordsman and Daeron never was, said Egg. Why give a horse to a man who cannot ride? The sword was not the kingdom, he says. The old knight's hand jerked so hard that wine spilled from his silver cup. Your father is a fool. He is not, the boy said. Whatever the reason for his treason, Sir Eustace had been dishonest with Dunk and Egg, and for that reason they decided to leave his service at first light. They would never get the opportunity, for they were woken in the middle of the night by panicked villagers to find that the woodlands around Steadfast Keep were on fire. Immediately assuming that the Red Widow was behind the inferno, Sir Eustace and Sir Bennis roused the 8 peasants from before to march against her. Unwilling to let the villagers be slaughtered, Sir Duncan intervened, forcing them to disperse, before offering himself back into the service of Sir Eustace to confront Lady Rowan on their behalf. Sir Eustace agreed. Better to go boldly than hide behind stone walls, the old man resolved. Better to die a lion than a rabbit. While Sir Bennis fled to safety, Sir Eustace Osgrey, Sir Duncan the Tall, and Egg the Squire rode off to confront Lady Rowan Webber, whose knights outnumbered them 7-1. The opposing sides met on opposite banks of the Chequy waters as the trees burned around them, with Dunk and Lady Rowan riding out into the stream to parley. The Red Widow denied setting the fire, accusing Sir Eustace of the deed. Unable to find any path to reconciliation, Sir Duncan finally utilised his trump card, showing Egg's signet ring to Rowan and revealing his squire's secret identity as a Targaryen prince. Stunned, the lady admitted she would sooner be the dragon's friend. Yet, dragon or no, I must have Bennis. It was a matter of principle, she explained, for rival lords would consider her weak if she allowed the foul knight's slight upon her to go unpunished. Dunk was not impressed. I remember once some little lord in the Stormlands took Sir Arlan into service to help him fight some other little lord. When I asked the old man what they were fighting over, he said, "Nothing, lad. It's just some pissing contest." Her freckled face went somber. Those pissing contests are how the lords judge one another's strength, and woe to any man who shows his weakness. A woman must needs piss twice as hard if she hopes to rule. If the lady required restitution to save face, Sir Duncan realized, then he himself would provide it to her. He drew his knife and slashed it across his face. A cheek for a cheek, he claimed, and now her wounded peasant had been avenged. "You're quite mad." The smoke had filled her eyes with tears. "If you were better born, I'd marry you." "Aye, my lady, and if pigs had wings and scales and breathed flame, they'd be as good as dragons." Yet the lady's honour had not yet been fully satisfied. Rowan continued to insist that she had not been behind the forest fire, while Sir Eustace refused to drop the accusation. So the Lady Spider demanded a trial by combat to let the gods prove her innocence. Thus came the showdown, as the houses of Osprey and Webber picked their champions. Naturally, Sir Duncan would fight on Sir Eustace's behalf, while Lady Rowan would be represented by her castellan, the Longinch. Sir Lucas Inchfield looked at Lady Rowan, his face dark with fury. "You will marry me when this mummer's fast is done, as your Lord Father wished." "My Lord Father never knew you as I do," she gave back. The fight was joined, the two knights clashing in the middle of the shallow river, the hooves of their steeds kicking up a churning spray as they collided in a furious whirlwind of steel and sparks. Both men were knocked off their horses, their joust becoming a brutal wrestling match, as each tried to drown the other beneath the waters. Both submerged beneath the surf, with Dunk holding the Longinch down against the riverbed until he stopped struggling, before the Hedge Knight himself lost consciousness. A few days later, Sir Duncan the Tall awoke in a bed within Coldmount, under the care of Cerric, the castle's maester. Maester Cerric revealed that the Longinch was dead, but that Dunk had also drowned. Fortunately, Cerric was Ironborn in origin, and the Ironborn had ways of resuscitating drowned men. Egg, the maester revealed, had been the one to pull Dunk from the river. An ever-faithful squire, the boy had saved his master's life. Yet Egg was now conspicuously absent. When Dunk asked where the child was, Cerric replied that he was attending Sir Eustace at his wedding feast. Wedding feast? Dunk did not understand. "You would not know, of course. Coldmoat and Steadfast were reconciled after your battle. Lady Rowan begged leave of old Sir Eustace to cross his land and visit Adam's grave, and he granted her that right. She knelt before the blackberries and began to weep, and he was so moved that he went to comfort her." In the end, the Lord of House Osprey and the Lady of House Webber had reconciled their differences over their shared feelings for a boy they had both loved, rendering Dunk's near death in the trial by combat pointless. The Hedge Knight began drifting back off to sleep, lulled into unconsciousness by the sound of falling rain. The drought had come to an end. Although Lady Rowan's marriage to Sir Eustace was one of politics and not love, Dunk still found himself feeling both jealous and betrayed. Reuniting with Egg, the Hedge Knight and his squire resolved to depart the next morning, even though the latter's wounds were not fully healed. Upon reaching the stables, Dunk found himself accosted by the Red Widow herself, who apologized for slighting him. In gratitude for his service in ridding her of the Longinch, she offered the Hedge Knight a magnificent new warhorse. Dunk refused, believing such a noble gift to be too good for him. Then, in a moment of impulsive passion, the two shared a heated kiss. Dunk claimed a lock of Lady Rowan's crimson hair to remember her by, then mounted up on his old trusty destrier with Egg by his side, setting out onto the open road towards their next great adventure. Some months after their escapades in Steadfast and Coldmoat, Dunk and Egg were travelling north through the Riverlands en route to Winterfell, where they hoped to enter into the service of Lord Beren Stark. Along the road they passed the head of a scepter impaled upon an iron spike, beheaded for speaking treason against King Aerys and his hand, Lord Bloodraven. Rumours abounded throughout the Seven Kingdoms that King Aerys was feckless and weak, and it was his uncle Bloodraven who truly ran the show. Those rumours were correct, and the dead Septon was a chilling reminder of how Bloodraven had spies everywhere and heard everything. As the Hedge Knight and his squire approached the God's Eye Lake, they found themselves approached by a convoy of riders. Assuming them to be bandits, Dunk and Egg hid in the bushes, but were spotted nonetheless. The riders were soon revealed to be the retinue of Lord Gorman Peake of Starpike, whose sigil was 3 black castles upon an orange field. They were neither bandits nor friendly. Dunk and Egg found themselves subject to the scorn and threats of Lord Gorman and his snide retainer Sir Alan Cockshaw, who mistook the Hedge Knight and his squire for brigands themselves. Fortunately, the standoff was diffused by a Hedge Knight in Lord Gorman's service, who introduced himself as John the Fiddler. Long and dark of hair, John the Fiddler was well groomed and dressed in a rich, silk-brocaded doublet, more ornate than any poor Hedge Knight who lived rough off the land ought to own. His appearance aside, the ostensible warrior bard treated Dunk and Egg with courtesy, informing them that Lord Gorman's retinue was on their way to a noble wedding. Lord Ambrose Butterwell was marrying the daughter of Lord Frey of the Crossing. The festivities were to take place at the Butterwell seat of Castle Whitewalls, and would include a grand tourney, which knights and lords had come from across the land to participate in. The jolly foppish fiddler cordially invited his fellow Hedge Knight Sir Duncan to participate in the jousting. Tempted by the allure of prize money, Dunk eventually agreed. On their way to Whitewalls, Egg revealed to Dunk that Lord Gorman Peake was, like Sir Eustace of Steadfast, a pardoned traitor. Does he really have 3 castles? Only on his shield, sir. House Peake did hold 3 castles once, but 2 of them were lost. How do you lose 2 castles? You fight for the Black Dragon, sir. Oh. Dunk felt stupid. That again. That night, Dunk and Egg encamped by the lakeshore with another group of fellow Hedge Knights, also making their way to the Butterwell tourney. There they befriended the likes of the young Sir Glendon, a bastard-born boy, claiming to be the son of the Targaryens' royal master-at-arms, and Sir Maynard Plum, a very distant relative of a Targaryen princess. The Hedge Knights revealed that the champion's prize was to be a dragon's egg. Dunk was astonished by this, Egg less so. I'd show you mine, sir, but it's at Summerhall. Yours? Your dragon's egg? Dunk frowned down at the boy, wondering if this was some jape. Where did it come from? From a dragon, sir. They put it in my cradle. Do you want a clout in the ear? There are no dragons. No, but there are eggs. The last dragon left a clutch of 5, and they have more on Dragonstone, old ones from before the dance. Well, see that you don't go mentioning this egg where anyone is like to hear. I'm not stupid, sir. Egg lowered his voice. Someday, the dragons will return. My brother Daeron's dreamed of it, and King Aerys read it in a prophecy. Maybe it will be my egg that hatches. That would be splendid. Sir Duncan and his squire arrived at Whitewalls the next day, and were invited into the castle without incident. The pair were split up at the stratified wedding feast, with Dunk brought to dine in the Great Hall with the other knights, and Egg ferried off to eat with the other servants and squires. Then came the bedding ceremony. Before Dunk quite realised what was happening, John the Fiddler had dragged him to his feet. "Here!" he cried out. "Let the giant carry her!" The next thing he knew, Dunk was carrying the squealing, squirming young bride up a flight of spiral steps into her husband's bedchambers. After depositing her on her marital bed, he stumbled away from the crowd for a breath of air, out onto a tower balcony beneath the open stars. To his surprise, John the Fiddler appeared by his side, friendly as ever, yet speaking in a newly cryptic way. "I dreamed of you, Sir Duncan, before I even met you. When I saw you on the road, I knew your face at once. It was as if we were old friends." Much like Prince Daeron the Drunken, this mysterious fiddler knight claimed to have seen Sir Duncan in his visions, claiming that Duncan had appeared to him in the all-white armour of the elite Kingsguard. The fiddler informed Dunk that his dreams always came true, and confided that he also dreamt that a mighty dragon would hatch from its egg right here in Whitewalls Castle. Remembering well how Daeron's dreams had correctly predicted his role in the death of Crown Prince Baelor, Sir Duncan knew well not to disregard such auguries. Parting with the fiddler, Dunk returned to his tent to find Egg poring over the guest list at the tourney. The boy was agitated, claiming that the majority of the lords and knights at Lord Butterwell's wedding belonged to houses which had sided with the Blackfire rebels some 20 years earlier. He had also gotten into a fight with some of their squires over insults to his father, Prince Maekar, coming perilously close to giving away his royal identity. Words are wind, Egg. Just let them blow on past you. Some words are wind. The boy was nothing if not stubborn. Some words are treason. This is a traitor's tourney, sir. Indeed, it was becoming increasingly likely that the wedding at Whitewalls was nothing more than a plausible pretext to gather like-minded Blackfire loyalists in one place, from where they would initiate a rebellion against the throne. If that were true, Dunk reasoned, then there was all the more reason for both of them to act natural, so as not to give away who Egg truly was. Ordering his squire to lie low, Dunk continued with his original plan to enlist and compete in the tourney. This did not go well for him. Sir Duncan the Tall was far better in a melee with a sword and axe than he was at jousting, something that was made very evident when the Hedge Knight was handily and degradingly unseated by Sir Uther Underleaf, a knight with a snail on his shield. Per the rules of the tourney, Dunk was obliged to hand over his armour and horses to the man who had defeated him. As Dunk did not have the money to ransom back his gear, he was essentially facing the end of his career as a Hedge Knight. Underleaf, as it turned out, was a professional grifter who travelled from tourney to tourney, bribing the organisers to pair him against newer, inexperienced knights so he could collect easy wins. Sir Uther offered to return Dunk's arms and armour if he agreed to become a patsy, travelling the land with him and taking a fall against the Snail Knight at 20 future tourneys, in exchange for a cut of the winnings. Dunk flatly refused. "I lost my armour, not my honour. You'll have thunder and my arms, no more." Exasperated by what he saw as foolish, honourable naivety, Sir Uther levelled with Dunk. The Snail Knight had been paid to kill the Hedge Knight. It was only because he had not been paid enough that Sir Uther had dealt Dunk a wounding blow rather than a fatal one. Someone was out for Sir Duncan's head. Perhaps the organisers of this traitor's tourney had discovered the identity of his squire, or perhaps other shadowy actors sought revenge for Dunk's role in the death of the beloved Prince Baela at Ashford Meadow 2 years prior. Whatever the case, the plot soon thickened when Lord Butterwell's dragon egg went missing, with Lord Gorman Peake immediately accusing one Sir Glendon Flowers of stealing it. A lowly, bastard-born Hedge Knight with no titles, Sir Glendon was looked down upon by all the landed lords at Whitewalls, yet had embarrassed his ostensible betters by unseating several of them in the jousts. For this he had been made scapegoat for a crime he was innocent of. Dunk wished to help the lad, but he had more pressing issues. Another egg had gone missing, his squire, who was nowhere to be seen or found. As everyone dogpiled upon Sir Glendon, Dunk found himself accosted by Sir Alan Cockshaw, the haughty knight who had been travelling with Lord Gorman and John the Fiddler. Sir Alan informed Dunk that he knew where Egg was and would lead him to the boy while everyone else was distracted. Foolishly, Dunk followed him right into a trap. Sir Alan had been the one who paid Sir Uther to kill Dunk. The Hedge Knight's crime had been to attract the attention of the handsome, charismatic John the Fiddler, whom Sir Alan was in love with. Sir Alan led Dunk into an isolated, enclosed courtyard. Then, lashing out with the fury of a jilted lover, aimed to kill him with a dagger. Dunk got the better of his assailant, sustaining a slash to the side, but bashing Sir Alan with a rock and throwing him down a well. Emerging from the tail end of this altercation was Sir Maynard Plum, who revealed himself to be no true Hedge Knight. Almost certainly a spy in Bloodraven's service, he helped Dunk up, cleaned and dressed his wounds, and revealed the linchpin behind the entire conspiracy. Dunk used his legs. "Lord Alan, he's going to drown. He shan't be missed, least of all by the fiddler." "He's not," Dunk gasped, pale with pain, "a fiddler." "No, he's Daemon of House Blackfire, the second of his name." Sir Maynard informed Dunk that Egg was currently in the castle sept. Dunk immediately went to him. Yet, as it turned out, Egg was fine. More than fine, in fact. In a stroke of bold courage, the boy had pulled off the mother of all bluffs, revealing the royal signet ring from within his boot to Ambrose Butterwell and revealing his true identity, claiming that he and Sir Duncan were royal spies sent to investigate the tourney, and that his father, Prince Maekar, was aware of the plot and on the way to Whitewalls with a mighty army to crush the gathered traitors. Terrified for his life, Lord Butterwell had renounced his role in the brewing Blackfire plot, claiming it had all been Lord Gorman Peake's doing, and placing Egg, Prince Aegon Targaryen, under his protection. Dunk reunited with Egg just as Lord Butterwell's son-in-law, Black Tom Heddle, broke into the Sept to take the boy hostage. Yet, despite his injuries, Sir Duncan the Tall made quick work of the would-be kidnapper. He then bade Egg to flee the castle with Sir Ambrose, before the rest of the rebels in attendance discovered who he was. In order to buy time for his squire's escape, Dunk made his way back to the Great Hall to confront the mystery knight John the Fiddler, whose real identity was the Black Dragon Daemon II Blackfire, grandson of King Aegon the Unworthy and son of Daemon I, the king who bore the sword. In order to cause a distraction to ensure Egg's escape, Sir Duncan presented himself before the Black Dragon and all his rebel lords, accusing Lord Gorman Peake of framing Sir Glendon Flowers for the theft of the dragon egg, and demanding that the young Hedge Knight be allowed to let the gods prove his innocence in a trial by combat. Not only did Daemon agree, he chose to ride personally against Sir Glendon to settle the matter. Sir Glendon had been tortured by his captors, yet, even in his injured state, he proved a truer knight than the prince who'd come across the sea, his lance striking true and punching Daemon Blackfire right off his barded steed. Mere seconds after the Black Dragon hit the ground, war horns sounded beyond the castle walls. The light of the rising sun glittered off the points of 500 lances and 10 times as many spears. The knights' grey banners were reborn in 100 gaudy colours, and above them all flew 2 regal dragons on 9 black fields, the great 3-headed beast of King Aerys I Targaryen, red as fire, and a white-winged fury breathing scarlet flame. Unbeknownst to Egg, the bald boy's bluff had been no bluff at all. A massive Targaryen army had appeared before Whitewalls, albeit not one led by Prince Maekar, but by the king's hand. Bloodraven truly had eyes everywhere. The first Blackfire rebellion had perished on the Redgrass field in blood and glory. The second Blackfire rebellion ended with a whimper. Cowed before the mighty host before them, all of the Black Dragon's lords slunk away and abandoned him. In the end, the second Daemon Blackfire rode forth alone, reined up before the royal host, and challenged Lord Bloodraven to single combat. "I will fight you, or the coward Aerys, or any champion you care to name," he had demanded. Instead, Lord Bloodraven's men surrounded him, pulled him off his horse, and clasped him in golden fetters. Furthermore, Lord Gorman Peake and all the main Blackfire conspirators were rounded up and executed. After the dust had settled, Sir Duncan the Tall and his squire, Prince Aegon Targaryen, were brought before Lord Bloodraven for an audience. The pair explained their escapades to the king's hand. Impressed at the initiative and courage Egg had shown, Bloodraven offered his interpretation of the vision Daemon had shared with Sir Duncan the night of the bedding ceremony. "There have always been Targaryens who dreamed of things to come, since long before the conquest," Bloodraven said. "So we should not be surprised if from time to time a Blackfire displays the gift as well. Daemon dreamed that a dragon would be born at Whitewalls, and it was. The fool just got the colour wrong. Daemon's vision had come true in the end. A dragon egg had hatched at Whitewalls, only that egg had been, well, Egg, the squire of Sir Duncan the Tall, whose role in bringing down the Second Blackfire Rebellion had metamorphosed him from a little boy into the proud and confident Targaryen prince he was born to be. The after-action report complete, Lord Bloodraven provided Sir Duncan with the funds to ransom back his horses and armour from Sir Uthor, before sending the Hedge Knight and his faithful squire off. So it was that Dunk and Egg set back off towards their original destination, north to the land of the Starks, where their next grand adventure awaited. Over the next few decades, a series of family tragedies saw Egg booted higher and higher up the line of succession, until at the age of 33, he was crowned King Aegon V Targaryen, known also as Aegon the Unlikely. Even after being crowned, Egg never lost his fondness for the Hedge Knight he had travelled with during his youth. Fulfilling Daemon Blackfire's vision of Dunk in a white cloak, he appointed his old friend as Lord Commander of his Kingsguard, and turned Dunk into the most highly respected knight in all the Seven Kingdoms. However, both Dunk and Egg would perish in 259 AC in a great fire at the palace of Summerhall. An inferno, many say, was set by King Aegon himself, as part of a magic ritual to fulfill his brother Daeron's prophecy and restore dragons to the Seven Kingdoms. That prophecy was eventually fulfilled, not by Egg, but by his great-granddaughter Daenerys Targaryen. Still, although we know how Dunk and Egg's story ultimately ends, the tragedy at Summerhall takes place nearly 50 years after the third and most recent Dunk and Egg novella. George R.R. Martin has expressed his intention to write more stories about the adventures of the Hedge Knight and his squire in the future, and we will certainly cover them if they are ever written. In the meantime, we're planning to cover the stories from many other fantasy and sci-fi universes, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.